All right, so first things first, project. Project was handed out. This is project 3. It's due. I have it put in Blackboard as May 5th. I'm not sure if I'm going to adjust that time. If I adjust the time, I'll make sure to make an announcement. Everybody will know. But basically, I just want to do the date that night, the night of the final. So the day that we take the final, you should submit the project. Before that or that day, that'd be fine. So that's the idea behind that. Lab 9 is due this Sunday by midnight, so make sure to have that in. Uh, Lab 10, I just put Lab 10 out there. It's finally ready, and it's a bit bigger as well. I know hitting you with a lot right now, but this one's due not this Sunday, but next Sunday, so plenty of time to get started on that. But circling back to the project, did anybody have any questions, anything that they want to talk about with that project? Okay, so I'm going to make the assumption that everybody's getting started and it's going well, which is great, and I like to hear it. You're making a lot of functions here, and a few of them will turn out to be multi-value returning functions. You also you're opening up 2 files to write to, and there have been a few questions about that, but the answer is literally just you declare 2. So you can have a D in, or excuse me, a D out, and maybe an error D out or something like that. And you just open 2 separate files with both of those variables, and boom, you're sending output to 2 separate files.
Wait, I actually had a question about that. In the
Yeah.
directions, I think on part 9, there's 3 files that are mentioned.
Oh,
If I'm not mistaken, it's called like open statistics or something. Let me put it in front of me, but I was confused where that third file came into play because only 2 were mentioned. It's results.out, comma statistics.out, and there's like no mention of it except for on the function print heading thing.
where do you see that listed?
It's on the last page. It's step 9. It's for the function print heading. Yeah, I was just confused because it looks
Ignore
like.
that. That's a copy and paste error from a previous project that this was on.
Oh, okay.
So just results.out and error.log.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Cool, cool. No, it's okay. The only other question I had too was with the formatting. Um, so what do you mean by the post and do you know the I don't know if it's the post condition, purpose, and pre-post condition?
Each created function must have pre, post, and purpose, right?
Okay.
So that's just our regular function documentation. It's just written in a different order. I always write it as purpose, pre, and post, right?
Mhm.
So the purpose, you say, what is the point of this function? Why did you create this function? And no,
Okay.
because you told me to, not a good reason. you know, I mean, it is a pretty good reason, but
Yeah, yeah.
if you have a function called calc averages, well, what does it do? Tell me what it does, right? I should be able to read your documentation and figure out exactly what it does. And now your
Okay.
pre is saying like, well, what is an assumption that is there anything? Are you making any assumptions? Like for example, some of these you're supposed to be doing error logging, right? So if somebody inputs an invalid triangle that is, say, a -2 for a side, like we have in our example right at the beginning, a -2, a 14, and a 9. That's not a triangle because the side can't be negative, right?
Mhm.
Well, you can say for your pre for a lot of these, which will throw off the calculations entirely. Well, I mean, it just wouldn't work if you had a negative side. You would just say, like, for example, the pre would be that the parameters you're passing in is for a valid triangle. So
Mhm.
this will give you the accurate area of a triangle as long as what you give me is the accurate sides to a real triangle that actually exists. Because
Okay.
you're going to be doing that checking outside the function, right?
Mhm.
And you're not going to call that function if it's not a valid triangle, right?
Yeah.
So you can
True.
feel free to put that in the pre. Then when I read it, I say, okay, this calculates the area of a triangle, and the pre or your assumptions going into this function say that these sides should make up a proper triangle. Okay, that makes sense, right? Uh,
Mhm.
I can't think of off the top of my head, but like two of the sides, any two of the sides have to add up to be greater than the third side. So you can't have like 100 and then one and one for a triangle. That doesn't add up to a proper triangle. So how are you going to find the area of that thing? That doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah.
And then so your post just tells you what's going to be true about the system after the function is called. So we'll get into that a little bit today when we're talking about multi-value returning functions. But generally, with a single value returning function, you're just trying to say, this is what will be true about the system after it's over. Like, what are you going to return? What are you going to tell me? What's going to change about the system after the function is called? So, like, calc averages, well, the averages of the area will be returned, or is it going to be printed to the screen, or what's going to be true once it's done. If it's something that just prints a greeting to the screen, you would say the greeting will be printed to the screen. That's a good post, right? uh,
Mhm.
but if it returns a string, which you're then expecting the whoever's calling the function to either print that string to the screen or send it to a file, you would say, I will return the string, and so that whoever's reading that documentation will know, oh, I gotta actually print this to the screen once I get the answer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's good. Thank you.
Yep. Um, and then the last one, right below that, we have document your parameters as it was discussed in class, indicating if it was in or out parameter. I had only realized after making that multi-value returning functions video, which I will have to somehow figure out how to amend. But we'll talk about what that means, indicating an in or an out parameter and how all that works. Hopefully that'll clear everything up there. Okay,
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
no problem. By the way, did you get a chance to look at that the group works video that I put out the other day? Not yet.
Oh. Oh
No.
yeah, I did.
Was that what you had in mind?
Yeah,
Good
yeah,
start.
yeah. That
Okay.
was really yeah, yeah, really helpful. Thank you.
Okay. I'm gonna do the same thing with functions this next weekend, so we'll have something with functions too, and yeah, we'll just keep doing that.
Okay, yeah, that'll be perfect. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so project done. Everybody's happy with that. Um, quiz. There will be another quiz. Uh, this Friday is the plan. Worst case scenario, it doesn't get put together by this Friday. We'll have it early next week, but I'm gonna try to get it together by this Friday. Just one more assessment on looping. I don't think that we'll throw anything in there about multi-value returning functions, but I want to reserve the right to maybe start with that because I definitely want to put something together too, so that you guys get a feel for multi-value returning functions and all that stuff. But it's a little soon. Ah. How's everybody feeling about multi-value returning functions, though? I mean,
They're
comfortable
pretty
with it?
confusing.
Pretty confusing. Okay, okay, then we'll definitely spend some time on it today and Thursday.
Okay. It's like the swapping of the swapping of orders and stuff trips me up a little bit.
Oh yeah, no, I did that on purpose just to trip you up, just to make sure that you're like
Yeah,
understanding.
it worked. It works.
Awesome. I've got another example like that I'm gonna go through, so we'll do it live so that you can ask all the questions like as we're going through it.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So quiz, good. Lab, like I said, this is the last lab, lab 10. I just posted it right before we got started here. Um, hopefully no issues with that one. Just gave it a quick read through. Seems good. Uh, it's a little bit bigger as well. So just a warning. You got more than a week to do it though, so plenty of time. Okay. Now what I have here are the questions from the last quiz that we did. So I wanted to go over this really quick just to make sure that everybody understands. I mean, everybody should be able to go in and review their quiz and see what they got wrong and why they got wrong and blah, blah, blah. And if you disagree or if you think I did something wrong, please let me know, and we'll talk privately, and we'll get that figured out. Okay. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and just fill this out. So when we're saying the 4 steps used to construct a count-controlled loop, so remember this is a count-controlled loop, not an event-driven loop, which would be like an end-of-file loop, not a sentinel loop, uh, and no flag-controlled loop. So this is just a count-controlled loop. So the first thing that we do is we need to initialize LCV. You can say declare and initialize LCV, declare LCV, whatever. Declare and initialize LCV is the first thing that you want to do. And then next, you need to do your loop test. So this is what says that like, oh, our LCV is less than some value. And remember, an LCV is not an LCV. It needs to be in the loop test in order for it to be considered a loop control variable. But we'll talk more about that in a minute. Next, we have our loop body. So this is where the actual work happens. This is our reason for doing a loop, is the loop body. So if you forget the loop body, I don't know what you're doing with a loop. And then lastly, we need to modify the LCV. So we need to get our LCV closer and closer to the condition where the test will be false so that we can exit the loop eventually. All right. Any questions on problem number 1? No? All right. So indicate the statements that correspond to the 4 steps above. So the 4 steps above: initialize LCV, loop test, loop body, and modify LCV. Use the numbers to the right of each line. Additionally, provide the output that is produced by the code snippet. Okay, so first, we're going to identify all of our steps here. Like number 1, we're declaring int count equals 10. And here we have a while count is less than 30. So count is being used to control this loop. So number 1 is our initialize LCV. Now, I saw some people put 1 and 2 for initialize LCV. Now, that's not true. Sum is not used in the LCV at all. Sum is not the LCV. You can't have multiple LCVs and all that stuff. But we're not doing that in this class. Like, I'm saying with 99% certainty, I'm not going to ask you a question. I would expect you to be able to identify it because, it's just part of the loop. But we're not even going to get that complicated. So this count is the only LCV that we're dealing with here. The sum is used in the loop body, and the loop body alone. So that brings me to, this is the loop test. We just talked about that. And then number 4 is our loop body. And then number 5, we're modifying count. We're adding 10 to count each time. So this is our modify LCV. I also saw a few people put 6 as part of the loop body, and it's not because, well, 1, it's outside of the curly braces here, but our loop, this code where we add to the sum, will run multiple times, but this cout statement will only run once, and that's the big difference. So give the output below. Okay, we can do that. So the sum is and then colon, and then I can't tell if there's a space there. I'm going to say that there isn't, though. So we have a set W of 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we're somewhere in between these spaces. Remember, it right aligns and all that. So now let me run through my loop really quick. So count equals 10, and sum gets 0. So we come into the loop, count is 10. So is 10 less than 30? Less than or equal to 30? That's true. So we go in, and sum gets sum, which is 0, plus count. So sum goes from 0 to 10. And then count gets count plus 10. So count turns to 20. We go back to the top of the loop and we say while count, which is 20, is less than or equal to 30, which is true, we go in and we do the sum. So 10 plus 20, so 30 gets stored in sum. And then count gets count plus 10, so 20 turns to 30. And then we go back to the top of the loop. 30 is less than or equal to 30, that's true. So sum gets 30 plus 30, 60. And then count gets 30 plus 10, or 40. 40 less than or equal to 30, that's false. So we come down here and we output the sum is, like I started here, set W7, that's my set W7, and then the sum, which is 60, so 60, like so. Now, any questions on problem 2? All right. Now, the 4 steps used in constructing an end-of-file loop. Oh, man. See, I wish that we had 100% on the count control loop versus the end-of-file loop. Sadly, that wasn't exactly the case. It was very good, though. But what's the one difference? Can somebody chime in and tell me what's the one thing that's different with an end-of-file loop?
Priming read.
Priming read. So technically we are initializing and declaring an LCV, and that LCV is our input file and all that stuff, but our vernacular is different. We call this the priming read. But we still have a loop test. We still have a loop body where we do something with the contents of the file that we're reading, and then we modify LCV. So that was all that changed. All right, and now this big one here that had a little trick in it. So fill in the blanks, the code snippet below, given the data in the input file, trace the code created and provide with the output, use the space below. So here's the file. This is our input file, data.in. So fill in the blanks to create a proper end of file loop below. So step one. Step one is our priming read. So our priming read is we need to get read num in, right? Because we're saying we're using num here. Sum gets set to 0 right away, but we're using num, so that's obviously what we're reading from the file. We have a whole bunch of numbers here. Okay. And we're using din. So my step one is going to be din in an extraction operator, and then num. That's my priming read. Now my loop test is just going to be din. So while din, and my loop body is this. Okay, well, we'll worry about that in a minute. And my step 4 is my modify the LCV, which is the exact same thing as my priming read. So din num. Okay, did that first part make sense to everybody? Was that clear?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we have a few variables. Let me just declare those over here. So, and then I'll just use a little marker to show where we're at in the file. So starting here, we do an if not, so we open up the data file. The data file does exist. We're telling you that here, and that it does have contents. If not din, cout file not found. Okay, we go into the else path because the file was found, and then we execute our priming read. So, let me, before I forget, sum is set to 0 initially. So we din num. Well, we're reading into an integer, so the integer reads until it finds a non-integer character. So we're going to read the 3, and then we're going to leave off right here pointing at the minus sign because we can't read a 3 minus something. We're not doing math, we're just reading an integer. So num gets set to 3. Okay, now we ask a question. If num is less than 0, num is not less than 0, it's 3. So we just see out num and then space. So our output becomes 3 and then space. So I'm just going to do that to signify that there's a space there. And then we read the next value from the file. So we're right here over top of the minus sign, so we read -3. And then there's a new line character here because we have more stuff here. So we're going to read the -3, and then we'll be waiting right here. So let me just cross these out, and then 3 becomes -3. And then we go back to the top, and we say while dn. Well, dn would still be true because we did successfully read from the file. So we go into the loop and we say if num is less than 0. Well, that's true this time. We have -3. So sum gets sum plus num. So sum is 0 plus -3. Our sum is -3 so far. And then we read the next number from the file. So we read the 0, and then we get to the negative sign, and then we stop because we can't read 0 minus something. So 0. Now in here, we say, oh, we just modified the LCV, and we go back to the top and we say while dn. dn is true because we did successfully read something from the file. So we say if num is less than 0. 0 is not less than 0. 0 is equal to 0. So we go to the else path and we output 0 space. And then we read the next number. And the next number, we're right here over this minus sign, so we read -3. And then there's a white space character, so we stop there. So I'm going to put my little tick mark right there at the negative sign there. Scratch those off. And wait, what number was that? Was that -3? Yeah. Okay. So then we go back to the top of the loop. Yes, we did successfully read a number, so we keep going. And we say if num is less than 0. That is true in this case again. So sum gets sum plus num. -3 plus -3 equals -6. And then we read the next value from the file. Now the next value from the file is actually negative. We can read that. 4, 4. So -44 is what we end up reading into num. And then we go back to the top and we say while dn. dn is true because we did successfully read from the file, but now we're all done reading from the file. There's nothing left to read, but we did successfully read the last time that we read from the file. So we go into the loop and we say if num is less than 0, which it is, sum gets sum plus num. Okay. So -6 plus -44 equals -50. Else we don't take that path. So we go down and we do our modify LCV again. And we read dn into num. Well, there's nothing left to read. So we don't change anything. All that happens is our dn changes to false because we didn't successfully read something from the file. So going back to our loop test, we say while dn, well, dn is false, so we exit out of the loop, and then we exit out of the else block here, and then we output this cout statement. So we outputted an end line, and then we say the sum is colon space -50. And then another end line. So we would be right here if we had anything else to do, but we don't. Let me double check that was all that was asked here, right? Fill in the blanks and give Given the sample of the input file, trace the code created and provide with the output. Yep, that's it. So any questions on this one? The negative 44 there was the trick that I thought it was a bit of a trick. All right. So I have something here. Another abomination of using functions that I created. So let's really quickly go back over exactly what, and I need to make my function prototypes here as well. But so the only difference between a multi-value returning function and a single value returning function is your multi-value returning function will, instead of passing by value or pass by copy, depending on how you want to, oh my god, depending on how you want to say it, both ways are perfectly fine. So depending on if you're passing by value or passing by reference. If you're passing by value, that is our standard declare the data type and then give the identifier a name. What it does is it makes a copy and passes that copy into the function. If you pass this with an asterisk after the data type, what you're saying is pass this by reference instead. And that reference is, instead of it passing in a copy of the value, it passes in the actual address of where to find the variable that gets passed in. And since it knows in memory where to find the value, it also will modify that original value. So in here, in function 1, I have declared in1 as a pass by reference. And that pass by reference means that when I pass in int1, rather than passing in a copy of, well, it would be 0 and right here, right? Rather than just passing in 0, it's going to pass in the location where this 0 is stored. So if I modify this in one variable, it will modify int1 over here in main. Okay? So before I run this, because I do want to run this and like see what the actual output is and all this stuff, I want to grab this and let's trace through it the way that you would do for an exam. So Drew, this is what I was talking about, and I hope that this will give you a good chance to ask all the questions that confuse you about multi-value returning functions. Even though we're not explicitly talking about multi-value returning functions, I want to get a grip on just the passing by reference in general, and then multi-value returning functions will come with that, I think. Okay, so what I want to do here is I want to have my red marker here where I'm going to say what the output is for all these things. So let me declare int1 right here in main will be 0, and then int2 be 1. And int3 gets 2. So when I do this first cout statement, I mean, that's pretty easy, right? So we're just going to output 0 space 1 space 2 and then end line. So we're right here next time that we go to write something. Okay. Now when we call function 1, we're passing in int1. So it's 0, but it's passed by reference. Int2, we're passing in a 1, and that's passed by copy. So when I write this out, which I'll write it down here to signify that there's a difference. This is the parameters that I am passing in. So in1 is, instead of just saying 0, what I like to do when I was thinking about this is I'm passing in int1. So really, this in1 is just pointing to int1. You know what? I should probably have written my output somewhere else, huh? There we go. So in1 is pointing up here to int1 back in main, okay? So anytime that we go to read from this, we actually read from this. Anytime that we go to update this, we actually update this. Now in2 is pass by copy. Whoops. Now in2 is pass by copy, so we actually pass in a copy of the number 1. Now when we enter the function, we can see not a lot happens here. In2 gets in1. So in2, which is 1, gets in1. Well, in1, follow the arrow, and we find, oh, that value is 0. So in2 gets 0. And then we're at the end of the function, so we exit the function. So now we're right here, and we're about ready to do another cout statement. Nothing changed in main. That's fine. And all of these variables are destroyed, right? Because we exited the function. So those variables are gone. Now let's do our cout statement. So our cout is int1 space int2 space int3. So 0, 1, 2 again. Now we get here, we're calling function 2, which has 2 parameters being passed to it that are both passed by reference. So in2, in3, and they're both passed by reference. I just got to know where to send them. So first we're passing in int3. That's our first parameter. So actually int2 is going to point to int3. Now does everybody see why that is? Because they're both our first parameter, right? Okay. Next we passed in int2. So in3 points to int2, like that. So now when I say in2, we're talking about this value here, gets in2 plus in3. In3 is this one right here. So 2 turns into 2 plus 1, or 3. And that change is reflected back into main already. Okay? Now we say in3 gets, so in3, which is this value here, gets into this value divided by 2. So 3 divided by 2 is 1. Okay, now we're at the end of the function, so we exit the function, and we're ready to do our next cout statement, and we will delete our function variables because they are gone now. They are out of scope. And then now we do our cout of 0, 1, and 3 now. 0, 1, and 3. And then we go to the next line. And now we are here. Okay, so with function 3, these are both passed by copy. Both of these are passed by copy. So we'll declare int1, int2, make our boxes for them. Now we're passing in as our first parameter int2. Int2 is a 1, so I'm going to write that right there so I don't forget. And our second parameter is int3. Int3 is 3. So int1 ends up becoming a 1, a copy of 1, and int2 ends up becoming our 3. There. And what we do in this function is just output int1 space int2. So int1 is 1 space int2 is 3. 1 space 3. And then an end line. So we'll go to the next line. And now we're at the end of this function. So variables are gone. And then we go back up to the top. And then here we are. We're going to do another cout statement. And then so our next cout ends up being int1, int2, int3. So 0, 1, 3. And next we're going to call function 2 again. This time with int2, comma, int3. So what we'll end up with is our variables, our parameters here in the function in2, in3. So in2 is going to point to int2 here. And in3 is going to point to int3. Like this. And then so now in2, I probably shouldn't have named these things so close to the same. So in2, which is this one, gets in2 plus in3. So 1 plus 3, 4, goes right here. And then now, this next line, in3, which is this one, which points up here, gets in2 divided by 2. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. And then now we are at the end of the function. So we exit. And we're about ready to do our last cout statement. But our variables are destroyed. And now we do our output of 0, 4, and 2. And then we are done. Now, did that clear anything up, or do you think that that confused it a little bit more?
No, it makes it more a little more clear now. I don't know why, just the way the video was going through it, it just kind of confused me a little bit.
So maybe
But I
just
mean,
more of these would help, right? Like just
just seeing it more would help.
okay.
But it's good. I mean, basically, I don't know. Maybe the one in the video looked different for some reason. I think they were named the same or something, and you're still switching them.
Yes.
So it confused me a little bit.
I was trying to do there was trying to shove two things together, which one is so I named these a little bit different, but not too different. And basically what I tried to do in the video was, oh, okay, well, they should know this too, so this shouldn't be too confusing. But if I said like int2 here and then int1 there, but then if I pass them as int1 and int2, you should know that they get swapped when they come in here because it's not the name that matters, it's the order that you pass them into the function that matters, right?
Yeah.
So, but maybe that was a little too close of names, though.
Yeah, it was, for some reason, I don't know why, it just, just wasn't sitting right with me.
But so far, it's not the pass by reference that's like problematic necessarily, right? It's the...
No, I understand that.
Okay.
that with the ampersand, it changes what's in main and it loses its value after it leaves the function, just like any other function.
Yep.
Like I get all that stuff.
Okay. Good.
I think I just have to see it happen more, till I get used to it.
No problem. Yeah, that we're gonna have plenty of practice with this, hopefully. Hopefully. Like I said though in the video, multi-value returning functions, you don't use them that often. In fact, they're kind of bad practice in a lot of places that you might want to use them, but we need to come up with a whole bunch of examples to practice them because uh, these concepts like passing by reference versus passing by value is fundamental, fundamental
Hmm.
when it comes to programming. It's so important. I can't even begin to explain. So if you plan on going on, make sure that you understand this um, quite well. Okay. So this was the code trace that I randomly came up with right before class started. Again, any questions on this? Yes, I did make it deliberately confusing. Hopefully not too confusing though. Everybody here should be able to do this code trace on their own now. Maybe. We getting there? Okay. I'll wait until this weekend after I do the next group works where hopefully we'll see more examples of stuff like this and I'll ask next week. Okay. So the next thing that I wanted to go over was basically it was something that no, that's not it. It's something that I neglected to talk about during the multi-value returning function video that I really want to talk about because we are going to ask you to do this. This is the last line of the documentation for the triangle project. Document your parameters as was discussed in class regarding it is in or an out parameter. So, and I just wanted to pull this up as an example. This is in your next lab, so don't get too excited. You don't have to go solve it right now. But so we have variables now that we are passing by reference that we don't care about the value coming in, right? Um, and I figured it would be best to take a look at an example function that you'll actually be working on so that maybe when you start working on this, it'll click and you'll realize, oh, okay, that's what he was talking about, hopefully. Um, this compute paycheck function, this function takes rate and time and multiplies them to get a gross pay and then finds the net pay by subtracting 15%. So this is a void function, but it is a multi-value returning function because we are passing in float gross and float net. Both of these values are expected to be set by the time we exit this function, right? So when we have a purpose pre and post, our post could say gross and net will be set to the appropriate values or something like that. This would explain to me that, oh, these variables are output variables where you are going to put the solution. So that's a good example of a reason to use post. Now, the other thing that we like to do, just to make sure that you understand exactly what these variables are, is have you document them in line here. I would expect that you would put as your post what variables will be set with what, if it matters. If as long as they're passed by reference, I expect you to explain in your post, the post documentation, exactly what's going to change. But the other thing is, we like to do this and say this is like an input file. Not an input file, excuse me, an input variable. It's passed by copy, so of course it's an input file, input variable. I'm going to keep saying input file this whole time. I apologize. It's an input variable. So this parameter, when it gets passed in, we only care about it coming in. We don't care about it going out. It does nothing when it goes out. It gets destroyed. We don't care about it. Okay. So I'll do the exact same thing here for time. So time is an input variable. And we only care about the value coming in. Now, our gross is an interesting one because we need to ask ourselves, do we care about the value of this coming in? Well, you haven't written this yet, but if we look at what the objective is with this, it takes rate and time and multiplies them to get the gross pay. Then it finds the net pay by subtracting 15%. So 15% of the gross pay. So based on reading this, does anybody think that we care about what value is stored in gross coming into the function?
Coming into the function, I don't think it would matter, would it?
No. Yes, that's exactly right. It could though. It could have, but based on reading this, I would agree that it doesn't matter what the value is coming into the function. But when we exit the function, will gross have a value that we care about?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we call this an out parameter. Okay. Now, if we cared about it coming in and going out, which is a thing that could happen, I doubt we'll have any good examples of that here in this class. But if you do see it, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's just adding one more thing. We'll just do like in/out. So if we were like looking at gross and saying like, well, if gross equals this, then set gross to that. Otherwise, set gross to something else. Then we would say, oh, well, we care about the value of it coming in, and we're going to set it going out. But in this example, this is how you would document your parameters. You would just do this. So you're saying like, this is an in, this is an in, this is an out, this is an out. And there's your multi-value returning function all ready to go. And if I end up coming up with a good example where we care about it coming in and going out, I'll make sure to point that out, but I can't think of one. Okay, so how's everybody feeling about this one? The documenting and giving you guys a new reason to use post, purpose pre-post, right?
It definitely helps makes a little more sense of multi-value returning functions in general.
Good. Good. Remember, the objective is always with documentation. I shouldn't have to look at your code to know what it should do. I should be able to read your documentation and figure out what your code should do, right? I swear I did more writing in my programming classes than I did in my English classes. So the next thing that I want to talk about really quick, and then we're actually all done and we can go back to questions and just talk about some stuff, is that in the lab you'll be asked to solve for, you'll be asked to output a Fibonacci sequence. So does anybody here not know what a Fibonacci sequence is?
I have no idea what that is.
Okay, that's good. Thank you for speaking up. So
Isn't it like a spiral?
yeah. There are definitely examples of like hold on. I don't think that something like this does a good job of explaining what it is, but this is what it is.
Mhm.
All right, any questions, Alex? No.
What is
What?
it?
Huh?
Is that a hurricane?
Oh, that just makes my head hurt.
Well, okay. So there are two ways to think of a Fibonacci sequence when we get down to it, but I just want to say that I want to treat the first two values as one, okay? You can say that it's 0 and 1 or 1 and 1. So if you know about Fibonacci sequences, then you know what I'm talking about here. And just to simplify it for everybody else, we're just saying that the first value of Fibonacci sequence is 1, the second value of Fibonacci sequence is 1. So I've zoomed in a little bit. It's still a little faint, but can you see that that's a 1 there? And that's a 1 there?
Barely.
Okay.
Yep.
So those are the first two values of the Fibonacci sequence. Add them together, you get the next value of the Fibonacci sequence. So 1 plus 1 is 2. right? And now to get the next value of the Fibonacci sequence, you add the previous two values. So 2 plus 1 is 3. And now to get the next value, we do 3 plus 2, which gives us 5. And to get the next value, we do 5 plus 3, which is 8. And we just keep doing this, and you end up with this Fibonacci sequence, the spiral pattern. Now we're not going to get too crazy into the math behind this because I mean it is really cool, but and you know that would be fun, but this is just a simple exercise to show you looping, and I just wanted to quickly explain what the Fibonacci sequence is, because if you're just seeing it for the first time, then it can be difficult. So I'm saying f sub 0, or our first Fibonacci number, equals 1. I'm saying f sub 1 equals 1. So this is our first value, our second value. Now, so then that would mean that our next value, or f sub 2, is equal to f sub 1 plus f sub 0. F sub 1 is 1, f sub 0 is 1, so this ends up equaling 2. And now to make this a little bit more general, what we're saying is f sub n equals f sub n minus 1 plus f sub n minus 2. So this is the general equation to get any given Fibonacci number. So you got to start at the beginning. So basically what we're asking you to do is you're going to end up creating a function that outputs Fibonacci numbers in sequence. Like let's say somebody inputs an 8. So you will output 1, 1, 2. Let's say that they input a 4 so that I don't have to go as far. Then 3. Then, oh, that's it. That's 4 numbers. Done. That's all that you have to do. So you need to keep track of the first 2 numbers starting at 1, and then every single time that you go past the first 2, you need to add the previous 2, and then essentially do a little shuffle where this becomes n minus 2, and this one becomes n minus 1, and then when you calculate your next value, you just add them both up, and then you shuffle them all over again, and then just keep going in a loop. Everybody feeling comfortable to be able to do a Fibonacci sequence question? It might make more sense once you actually see the problem, and don't worry, tutors, anybody will be able to help you with it, but I just wanted to make sure to at least introduce it so that I'm not just throwing you to the wolves here. All right.